you for the most part, you look dead in the face of somebody who has a personality disorder, and unless you are engaged in the disorder, you can't see it.
No, and even then, I don't think people see it. Because here's another, to make matters even more complicated, here's another feature of borderline personality disorder that wasn't in the criteria, but any therapist knows this.
Enter the Freud.
Warning, this is for entertainment purposes only. It is no way medical advice.
I don't really know Amber and how much or how often she slipped into it, because maybe she doesn't slip into that much when she doesn't have a boyfriend breaking up with her, you know,
right.
And then so maybe she's not borderline personality disorder, but when she fell deeply in love and got sort of like her identity and her safety in life sort of got enmeshed with Johnny, and then Johnny started pulling away, then she went borderline, which honestly is not that uncommon. And so maybe she doesn't have borderline personality disorder. We sort of have to see her in a variety of different contexts, I think, to really determine that.
Yeah, that's true. And specifically, I guess if we were to just break it down for people who aren't psychologists, the basic, or like the easiest description, I think, is somebody, or for someone who has borderline personality disorder, is like a general perception that the world and those closest to them are going to be taken away and abandoned. There's an experience of potentially being abandoned by those closest, and or I think where even clinicians get really wound up and hyper focusing on the closest interpersonal relationships, and then they miss out on the fact that it's the world. When you're borderline, the entire world is catastrophically getting ripped out from under you.
Yep.
And
but what makes it even more of a mind, I think what you're saying is absolutely at the core, but what makes it more confusing and more of a mind fuck is there is that core fear of abandonment, but then there's this weird paradoxical thing of pushing people away.
Oh, right.
So there's some famous little saying, I forget what it is, maybe you can remember. It's something like, I hate you, don't leave me. Or something like, it's a little better and more dramatic than that.
Yeah,
there's this weird simultaneous pushing people away with violent hatred, and at the same time this desperate, please don't leave me. And those things exist at the same time.
Yeah, it's I love you, fucking.
Oh yeah, maybe
I love you, I'll kill you. I don't remember either.
But that paradox is a really important part of it, and it's part of why the borderline thing is so confusing and hard for people to understand, and why it's such a mind fuck for everyone.
Yeah, I mean it's really crazy when your environment has so many mixed up cues. Almost like I feel like today's world is more prone to activating people who are borderline than anything I've seen. It really is super confusing, and later on, when we get tired of this, I have plenty of examples that will prove that everyone is capable of becoming borderline. Everyone. But for now,
well, I think that's kind of my agenda in this video. Is I want everyone to realize that there's this borderline region in the psyche, and if certain things happen, your consciousness gets sucked into that intense black hole, and when you're there, like you're in a black hole, and you're like wildly irrational, and it's really this mind fuck nutty state, and you behave very, very badly.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then I hope you don't mind if we just take a slight segue, because I came home from work yesterday, and I turned on the news, which is my new favorite obsession, and I see that there's some leak from the Supreme Court that appears like they're going to make abortion illegal in some states, and I instantly, my first reaction was like, that's impossible. Like, what does that even mean? What is that? Like, that doesn't make any sense. And then of course, the news immediately goes towards, they'll find anyone who is borderline and then immediately let them speak about the subject.
For some reason, when you talked, I had this image of several years ago when my son was younger, I somehow succeeded in catching like an adolescent bunny rabbit. it was in our yard, and I cornered it, and it was already pretty fast and fairly big. It wasn't full size yet, but I cornered it, and I just got lucky because they're pretty quick. But I got it, and I grabbed the bunny, because it's a fun thing for me and my son. He was like 7 years old at the time, and I grabbed it, and it was all fun. But I did have this one kind of intense moment where right when I grabbed it, I looked into its eyes, and the look in its eyes, it just was like in the most intensely scared, just like, its adrenaline was pumping so hard that its eyes just looked like both terrified but also like psycho or something.
Oh.
And it just was like this moment of intensity there because it thought it was about to die and be eaten. So its brain was pumping the maximum hormones possible.
Yes.
It's like all of its hormones, all of its brain, everything was turned up to 100% because it thought it was going to die,
Yeah.
And so it just was like this intense thing. And I was trying to have like a fun little spring day with my son, and then suddenly there was this intense thing. And it was like, the animals, and humans included, we have this capacity to go into like fight or flight survival state where it's like, we'll do anything to survive. We say this term fight or flight all the time casually, but it's like a super intense state. And like animals can just go there in a way that we don't see humans go there very much. I think a lot of us humans, as we've been civilized over the years, we've like lost touch of that just intense fight or flight thing where you'll just like attack with the most vicious, insane, and it's almost even like a wild, self-destructive attack thing. And anyways, in that moment when I caught the bunny rabbit, I just got reminded of that level of primal intensity. Okay, so this fight or flight thing, then in humans, I think it gets transmuted because we don't do that where we just like lash out and attack and bite people. Like we never do that anymore as humans. But I think that same energy is in us, but it gets transmuted into like intellectual, ideological battles or something.
Yeah.
And so I feel like with the Supreme Court thing or even the Amber Heard thing or just like political things like wearing masks or vaccines or wokeism versus, Antifa or what, all this stuff. It's like that stuff I think is getting channeled into that. And this like black and white thinking at the highest level of stakes, and that part of our human gets channeled into that and goes into this like super intense, you're with us, you're against us, intense thing, and we just have this tendency to go into that.
Oh yeah, you know what, Dave? I just realized this is not like an intro to borderline discussion at all. Like, dude, if anyone is listening to this and they're like, what the fuck is this about? They don't know what borderline, they have to go and start with like, what is borderline? What?
That fits in. Last week when we were talking, I was using this alpha gorilla or diva psychology thing, and what you just said reminded me of it. Because part of maturing to the point where you can be relatively mature and not slip too deep into the borderline is what psychologists call optimal frustration. What are the other terms? So basically, it's kind of like you gradually get okay with it. You don't always get what you want. But I think someone who's sort of been spoiled or been treated like a princess, and really beautiful women in our culture, I hate to say it, but really beautiful women oftentimes get whatever they want a lot for many years because there's just this thing of a super beautiful woman has this like great amount of power in a certain way, and a lot of men are going to really want her, so they're going to give her what she wants to try to lure her into their thing. And so an extremely beautiful woman goes through life kind of getting what she wants a lot. She doesn't have that much experience of, I want this. No, you can't have that. She doesn't have a ton of that experience unless her parents gave it to her when she was really young. But by the time she gets into middle school, everyone around her is going to kind of be treating her like a queen. And so she's going to have this spoiled thing. And then at some point when you don't get what you want, say you finally get to marry like the most rich, famous, charismatic dude in the world in Johnny Depp, and so you're still getting what you want, and then he starts to not get what you want. You don't have that much practice with that, and you can quickly slide into temper tantrum.
Oh, yeah.
And that temper tantrum state, I think, is closely related to the fight or flight state, and it's closely related to a couple other states that are all kind of in this borderline cluster. And so Amber will slip into that a lot more than someone who's had a lot of healthy experience of that you don't get what you want, but you still get what enough to like survive. So you learn to tolerate, okay, I don't get what I want, no big deal. But Amber just didn't have enough of that. Most people just think that that's what borderline is what you just read. If you meet those 5 of those 9 criteria, you're borderline. If not, you're not borderline. Which just seems like unbelievably simplistic to me. Because what's one of the many huge problems with the sort of typical way that the field of psychology works these days is they don't even try to look at the root cause of any of that. It's just like, oh, you have these symptoms, you're borderline, end of story. But when I was listening to those criteria, I was thinking, okay, all of that makes sense because they're all rooted in the like underlying root condition, which was what I was describing.
Yes.
But then I'm even thinking you and I need to look, and then not just you and I, but the world of depth psychology needs to look even beyond that to really figure out, because it's a really complicated issue. Okay, so all of those criteria, to me, really obviously stem from what we're talking about, which is like super intense fear of abandonment and a confusing fear of connection at the same time. And that state puts a person in this like unstable emotions, intense periods of anger and like desperation acting out, unstable relationships, trying to like desperately get a relationship and trying to push people away from a relationship. All of that stuff just is like rooted in this underlying psychological state that I was just talking about.
Right. It's so fascinating. You know, as you were talking about this, I was just trying to figure out, like, in my own self-assessment, I'm like, how borderline am I? Right? Like, I'm serious. Like, seems to be something that normal people would do as they start to imagine, like, wow, look at how crazy. Like, anyone who's had a volatile relationship, when they see this discussion, they'll be like, oh my God, I might be borderline, or how borderline am I? Right? And it's like, it's really fascinating because it seems like, as you know, that a lot of this is a result of uniquely I was going to say uniquely disconnected attachment. That's like the weirdest wrong sentence. But like, seriously, as a kid, if you look at like, how does a parent misattune to the kid's needs in a way that then produces a child who's like that scared bunny rabbit that you were trying to catch? Yeah. How do you produce that? And you have to do it over and over and over and over and over, so that the person's, they have like a hardwired reaction to the world that it's like, oh, things are becoming unstable. Boo, I go to this place. I go to this psychic and emotional place. Yeah. Right. And it's super weird because then people who have this experience that they feel unsettled and incapable of dealing with the world's complexity, and they're like, oh, well, that's because my mom was an alcoholic. Oh, well, that's because, but then it doesn't make sense for all those people whose parents were alcoholics and they were actually abandoned over and over and they lived in foster care and they're not borderline.
Totally.
Like, that is, and I guess it's really confusing, but I don't even know what we're supposed to do with that statement, because as the more that we talk about this, I realize it's hard for me to stay in any framework with this conversation.
Because it's so complicated and important. Okay, let me just try to see if I can briefly address this super important question you asked, which is, why does one person whose mom is an alcoholic become borderline, and why does one person not? Okay, so my theory is that in every human, there's like this, I'm gonna use the metaphor of a demon. There's a demon in each of us, and when that demon comes out and possesses us, we go into this borderline state. And it's similar to the fight or flight thing, but we don't just act out in a fight or flight way. We act it out through these more like demonic or fucked up ideas, or we devise plots to like get revenge or to manipulate people, or it's much more of a mind fuck, because it's a human, unlike a rabbit, can use their mind to become tricky and manipulative and deceptive. And all of us, if the demon is let out of our cage, all of us can be possessed by that demon and start behaving in a borderline way. But if I'm using the cage and the demon metaphor, we all have a cage that we keep our demon in, and different people's cage has thicker bars or thinner bars. And those develop in childhood in different ways. Like, I think one key thing is this, what I call optimal frustration, which is like, if one kid learns, oh, it's painful when I don't have connection with mom or whatever, but she comes back, so eventually I'll get it. If he gets that a million times, he develops a fairly high tolerance for not getting what he wants.
Yeah.
And so the bars on the cage of his demon are pretty thick. But it could happen that he gets pushed to the edge where he now doesn't think he's going to get what he wants, and he gets pushed into this fight or flight thing, and the cage opens and the demon comes out. And I sort of feel like I'm a good example of that. I can feel the demon in me, and I can feel it's fucking powerful as hell. But like, I'm able to keep it in the cage quite well. But there's actually part of me that wants to let it out, but I'm scared to, because I can see the havoc that it would wreak in the world.
Yeah.
But there's almost part of me that wants to let it out, and I can sort of feel like I almost could just decide, you know what, fuck this shit. I'm gonna let it out, and I'm gonna fucking go black and scary on the world. Like, I could do that, and I kind of want to do that because I don't ever let myself do it.
Yeah.
And then there's people like Amber Heard, where she doesn't have as much control, she doesn't have as much frustration tolerance, and that demon busts out of her cage relatively easily. And then there's some people, and maybe Amber Heard's in this category, that are like, fuck it, I'm not gonna ever cage my demon. I'm gonna let that shit possess me all the time, because that's how I get what I want, or that's how I stay safe. So I'm just gonna fucking run that shit 24/7.
I like that. I think as you go back to Amber Heard, and you start to describe the experience of somebody who has successfully allowed the demon out. Because obviously, if you do this with very little skill, the world just stomps you.
And I think the reason the conversation gets a little like meanders this way and then over this way is because I don't think the world of psychology has mapped this out yet.
Yeah.
And I think the reason it hasn't mapped it out yet is A, it's complicated, B, it's super intensely charged, C, it's unconscious. It's like a hidden, mysterious force in our psyche, and the world of depth psychology is gradually unearthing this and trying to map it out. But it's just a new thing. I just don't think the world of psychology has this fully mapped out yet. I don't think people fully understand it.
You know, as you were saying it, I was picturing, like, you know, if you break your leg, you wear a cast, and so then everyone can see, oh, look, he's hurt because his leg is broken. If you have really intense anxiety or depression, you kind of do these behaviors that are easy to, you say, oh, we're starting to learn what anxiety and depression looks like. Most recently we are. But then this is like the third wave of the face of mental illness, that it's so disguised that you for the most part, you look dead in the face of somebody who has a personality disorder, and unless you are engaged in the disorder, you can't see it.
No, and even then I don't think people see it, because here's another, to make matters even more complicated, here's another feature of borderline personality disorder that wasn't in the criteria, but any therapist knows this. Well, maybe a lot of therapists don't know, but any good therapist knows this, is people who are in a borderline state, or who can operate in this borderline thing, they have Jedi mind tricks, and they can make you, so if you and me are if I'm in therapy with you, if you're my therapist, or if we're in a relationship, we work together, I can make you feel really intense things.
Oh, yeah.
And it's amazing how borderlines will, throw you into mind states, really intense mind states that you don't normally get into. I was working in this San Francisco General Hospital psychiatric emergency room with this awesome psychiatrist who'd been there 40 years and had seen 30,000 severely mentally ill people. And he was super chill and nice and always just in a good mood, joking. He sort of had this like Santa Claus thing. And one day, and I'd gotten to know him, and I'd always seen him like that. He stormed back into the doctor's office, and he was pissed, and he sat down, and he's like, that patient must be borderline, because I never get angry. And if I'm angry, I don't even need to get any more info. I just know that the person's borderline because they made me angry.
Wow. That's so weird.
It's that Jedi mind trick power they have to induce intense emotional states in other people it's really shocking and disorienting. And when it happens to you, you so go into the thing that now you can't even think clearly anymore. And you can't really think, oh, that person's borderline, they made me feel this way. Most people can't do it in the way this psychiatrist can do it. And all they want to do is just like get away. They just want to be like, that person's an asshole, I'm out of here.
Right.
Which is kind of the point of what the borderline Jedi mind trick is doing, is to create separation, because that's like safe for something.
You know, it's funny. A lot of beginning therapists and a lot of people who just get into therapy really get off on that little trick of saying like, oh, you can't make other people feel anything. So, like, you know, that first thing that you're taught is like, oh, you have to use I statements, but you can't say you made me feel bad.
Yeah.
Like, people actually talk like that, like it's this newly empowered stance. Like, I am an autonomous individual. You can't make me feel anything. And it's like, totally. I am not responsible for your feelings.
Yeah.
Totally.
And even to take that even one step further, you're talking about a slightly juvenile or simplistic perspective, but I got to take it one step further. There's this guy, what's his name? Sadhguru. He's this Indian guru who's super popular right now, and he's super cool. I really like him. I really think he's wise. I've actually learned from him, so I'm not trying to talk shit about him. But he makes the same point, and he makes it in a much more sophisticated way, but he makes the same point, and his point essentially is like non-attachment, and someone can come and like say mean things to you, but you, in theory, those words, they're just words and they don't actually, but it's not, but he's wrong. It's not true. Right. There's this weird, it's almost like I want to use the metaphor of a magnetic field, but it's an emotional field, and two people come and our emotional fields actually like vibrate within the other person, and one person can actually make you feel certain ways.
Yes, I suppose if you're sociopathic, then you can sit there and interact with people you deeply care about, and you can watch them in pain and squirming and suffering. You can be like, hey, I am not impacted by your suffering. But that's a totally obviously disconnected, stupid example. But it just kind of helps us get slightly more in a discussion of like when you're involved with someone who is borderline. And there is a whole host of treatment and psychologists and psychiatry that's involved with the treatment of borderline. But this is honestly the perception in that world is that you can fix borderline. It takes about 5 years of 2 times a week psychotherapy, and the borderline person has to be deeply invested in learning how to tolerate this thing.
Yes, and usually what has to happen is the borderline patient and the therapist have to get into a super intense, fucked up, intimate clusterfuck fight, and the borderline decides the therapist is a horrible person and fires him several times and then comes back, and they go through this like death rebirth thing together, and you have to do that to fucking cure the borderline.
Yes. Well, and there are some doctors who do this. And some of them are really good at it. Some of them are really good at it. And so it's strange that you can treat it, but oftentimes when you're learning about psychology, people will talk about borderlines as the therapist killers. The therapist killers. I worked with this one guy in a methadone clinic, and I came in and I saw they're like, oh, you have that patient? Yeah, man, he's a tough one. And I looked, and in the past year, he'd burned through like 9 shrinks. Yeah. Right? He just was like, eat him up, spit him out. And I walk in the room and sit down with him. Check this shit out. I walk in the room and sit down with him, and within like 2 minutes, because he's sitting there and he's just this scary ass dude, and he's like, his hands are all tatted up, and he's been injecting fucking speedballs into his knuckles, like, and they're inflamed, and he's just like seething with rage. As I walk in, this is his introduction to me, and he's just there like, telling me like the world is so fucked, you don't even know. This is how he wanted to introduce himself to me. And I literally, my reaction was like, get the fuck up and run out of the room. And what I said to him is, I was like, buddy, I'm having a really hard time even sitting here with you. This is in like, after 2 minutes of sitting with him, I said, like, I don't know what's happening, but I feel like I'm about to throw up. Like, I'm wigging out. And the guy goes from his totally like seething rage to, hey, sorry, bro. What's going on, man? Like,
dude, that's a great story.
He like immediately dropped his need to destroy the world. And then in that, he had a sense of self that was so caring and protective that, like, as soon as I told him, dude, I don't think I can take this shit, he dropped his thing and went to rescue me.
Totally. That's fascinating. Okay, let me do it. Let me give my quick little analysis of that. So this dude comes in and he starts doing a thing that makes you feel a certain way. It makes you feel a bunch of emotional ways, but it even makes you feel like you're going to throw up.
Yeah.
So he's like exerting some Jedi mind trick or energetic thing upon you. It affects you in a certain way. He's probably learned to do that when he was like a teenager, and he learns to do that as a self-protective shell to keep people at a distance because he doesn't feel safe when people get close. So he does that, and normally people just stay the fuck away from him. But you, or the other thing people do would maybe be attack him or criticize him, but you, because you're clever or tricky or because you are capable of tolerating intense shit, you did a different option, which was just like be honest with him, and you didn't abandon him and you didn't attack him. And I was like, wow. He was like, oh, sweet. Wow, someone doesn't abandon me or attack me. Cool. I kind of want to try to like keep this guy around.
Bro, it was so gnarly in the end of that internship when I had to leave the clinic. Like, I remember that was because he ended up becoming my patient. Mm-hmm. And in the end, when I had to leave, it was so gnarly because he cried. Like, he knew it was coming. I told him, like, hey, man, we're done. We got to wrap this up. But on my very last day, that dude who was so scary, like, he cried, and then I was just like, oh, we like fought our tears together. We're like, oh, we don't fucking, like, I'm not gonna tell you, like, we both like, it was like super intense, man.
Nice, dude. That's a fucking good story. Maybe we should end with that because I think that's a good way to end.
All right, totally.
All right, well, we should maybe just keep doing this while the Amber Heard trial keeps going. It's kind of a fun and interesting topic. Clearly, we have plenty more we could talk about.
Naturally.